Mary's the best known, least known woman in history. So I want to talk about the least known. How could she be the least known if she's the best known? Well, let's start with she's a Jewish woman, a Jewish matriarch. She has 8 or more children. She's early widowed and therefore becomes, in a sense, the head of the clan. And then we've got these extraordinary children, Jesus being the best known.
Welcome to Closer to Truth. I'm speaking with Professor James Tabor, a world-renowned authority on Christian origins, about his significant, riveting, disrupting, controversial new book, The Lost Mary, Rediscovering the Mother of Jesus, a new historical investigation of the most powerful woman in the world. James, it's great to see you. Congratulations on The Lost Mary.
It's great to see you, Robert. Thank you.
Okay, let's start with some of what some have called your radical claims. What's the core of the book, and why are they so radical?
I would start with the first line of the book, that Mary's the best known, least known woman in history. So I want to talk about the least known. How could she be the least known if she's the best known? Well, let's start with she's a Jewish woman, a Jewish matriarch. She has 8 or more children. She's early widowed and therefore becomes, in a sense, the head of the clan. And then we've got these extraordinary children, Jesus being the best known, but his brother James, I'm sure we'll talk about. So just to say that she's Jewish, I want to return her properly to the Jewish people. She's not Catholic. She never heard of the church. This is not dissing the church. It's just doing history. The Jesus movement is not Christianity. It's an apocalyptic messianic movement within Second Temple or ancient Judaism before the fall of the temple in 70. So I want to put her in her place, in her time. I also point out things like we think of her as Davidic. You know, if Jesus is the Messiah, you've got to be Davidic. But she has a strong priestly line mixed in. And we know this from other figures as well, that the priest and the kingly line, the royal, kind of like the double royalty, I have a chapter called Doubly Royal, mix in together. So that's an interesting thing. It's almost never pointed out. The children, I mentioned how many, we don't know exactly. It could be 8 or more. But just to picture her also as somewhat of a sophisticated background. She grows up in a town nobody's heard of, Sepphoris. Guess what? Largest urban center of the Galilee in the north. The largest city, actually, other than Jerusalem. But people haven't heard of it because of Nazareth, the little teeny village that's 4 miles south of the metropolis. So suddenly we're talking about a suburban kid, if we could use that term. So in many ways, I want to bring to the reader, what was she really? You know, we've been doing the quest for the historical Jesus for 200 years, and it's pretty accepted in every school, university. You know, let's try to get at the Jesus of history, not just the Christ of faith. But what about the Mary of history, not just the Mary of faith? So that's what the book's about.
Great. Well, we're going to get into and explore all of this, but first I should give a proper bio. James Tabor is one of the world's leading authorities on early Christianity. He retired as professor of Christian origins and ancient Judaism in the Department of Religious Studies at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, having served a decade as department chair. He holds a PhD in biblical studies and early Christianity from the University of Chicago. He is an expert on the Dead Sea Scrolls, the late Second Temple Judaism, as well as on Christian origins. He's the author of 10 previous books, including the international bestseller, The Jesus Dynasty. Over the past 3 decades, James has combined his study of ancient texts with field work in archaeology. And since 2008, he has been the co-director of the acclaimed Mount Zion excavation in Jerusalem. Oh, and something else. In the spirit of full disclosure, which we always have here on Closer to Truth, James is a lifelong friend of almost 60 years. So, James, let's get started with the title. Mary is lost. What are some of the key misunderstandings that are prevalent in the world today that would characterize that word lost?
Okay. You know, I played with titles like we'd all do as authors. And I thought of the real Mary, but we ended up with Lost, and I think it's better because you got the real Jesus, the real this, the real that. We get kind of tired of it. Like there's the fake, the false, the traditional, and the real. But what about the lost Mary? Meaning we don't have a clue. Now, everybody knows Christmas and everybody knows the crucifixion. What else do we know? There are a couple stories here and there that people might recall, but non Bible readers probably wouldn't even know those. So notice birth, death of Jesus. After Jesus dies, nothing. What about her life? You know, birth of Jesus and death of Jesus are a nice bracket, but there's got to be something in between. So the challenge is how to fill that in responsibly. There's got to be some imagination, some speculation. I would rather call it contextualization. Let's put her back where she belongs in her own time and place and come up with methods of doing that. And my method was to take every single textual source that we have, clearly the New Testament sources. There are about a dozen passages, and I see them almost as breadcrumbs in the forest. But believe it or not, a couple of them, even though they're a passing reference, I'll give you an example. In Mark 6, that's our earliest gospel. It's not the first in the New Testament, but it's the earliest record we have of Jesus and his life story and so forth, his teachings, is the Gospel of Mark. Chapter 6, verse 3, it talks about Jesus coming home to the village, Nazareth, and then he's identified as, who is this guy Jesus? Isn't that the son of Mary? Son of Mary. Interesting. We only know of women named and having children when they're very prominent. Uh, there's a few examples on ossuaries, which are these bone boxes in Jerusalem. It's almost always so and so son of, so and so son of. So when you say son of Mary, I think it's showing her importance is one way to understand it. So she has a background that we can recover by these little crumbs here and there. Why isn't the father mentioned? Joseph, it's well known, Joseph and Mary. You know, everybody's heard that. The manger scene, everything else. So why does it say the son of Joseph and his mother Mary, or Joseph and his mother Mary? We think he's probably gone. He's probably dead at that time. It's never mentioned after Jesus is 12. And other than that, he's only mentioned at the birth. Now, the father would be at the crucifixion if he was still around. You know, he would be standing with his wife. They would be weeping on each other's shoulders, but he's not there. That then adds something because she becomes the matriarch of a household. We know of 5 boys, 4 brothers, and Jesus, that's 5, 3 sisters, but there could be more that we don't know. So the reason she's lost is because of sexuality. Let's just be frank. Mary ends up being not a Jewish woman, more a celibate. I don't want to call her a nun because she's much higher than a nun. I mean, if we go all the way, she becomes the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of God. So that's her theological role in particularly Roman and Greek Catholic tradition. But even, I would say, among non Catholics, Protestants would say, well, yeah, she's the mother. And some would say she had other children. But Martin Luther, for example, thought she remained a virgin her whole life. So suddenly you have somebody that's never, she's married, but not really. I mean, it's a sort of companionship, you could say, a friendship marriage, but they're not having intercourse. They're not living a normal married life. And one child, Jesus, that's what becomes the tradition. So look what's been lost. Her widowhood, her being head of this large clan. And it's not just any clan, as it turns out, it's the Davidic clan, the descendants of King David of old. So they're a messianic clan potentially. Any male who can claim descent from King David, and they were very careful with these genealogical records, is pretty special, but also in a lot of danger. We have records that the Romans were looking for these people and watching them, and especially as time goes on past the life of Jesus, the Emperor Vespasian, for example, who destroys Jerusalem in the year 70, he's asking around, is anybody of the line of David, because we want to question them. You can see why. We don't want any revolt started. We want peace. We want prosperity. We don't want these crazy messianic things happening. So there's just so much about her, a Jewish married woman, 8 children in a very, very dangerous time. And she also comes from, I think, an aristocratic background. I tell my students, she probably knew what fork to use if she's visiting someone for dinner at a banquet. Not that they use forks, but you get the idea. She wasn't out of place. Another reason, and there are many others, but big one, we're talking about big ones. So sexuality, and the other one is the fact that when Jesus dies, James, the brother of Jesus, takes over leadership of the movement. Now, who knows that? First of all, she's not supposed to have other children, but she does. But are we talking about a dynasty now? In other words, one brother dies, the next brother takes over, and he becomes the leader of the group. He's usually dismissed, oh, well, the leader of the Jerusalem church. First of all, there's no church. He's a leader of the entire Jesus movement. He's a successor of Jesus. Okay, now Jesus is considered, I think, senior as the elder and also the Messiah by his followers. But the movement continues. They're waiting for the end. They're an apocalyptic group. And everyone would say it's Peter. We think of Peter and Paul. You go to the Vatican today, you walk up those broad steps. I know you've been there, I've been there. And you see Paul over on the right and Peter on the left. And then you just go on into the Vatican. If we could redo the Vatican, we would have James in the middle. James who? My students are, James who? Dr. Tabor, who are you talking about? I know a fisherman there was named James, and there's another disciple named James. It's actually Jacob in Hebrew. My name is James. I should be called Yaakov, Jacob Tabor, but in English it's James. So what happened? It's another reason she's lost, because you want to get rid of the family. This is later, 2nd, 3rd, 4th century. She's an asexual woman and she doesn't have a family, so that Peter can come forth, Peter and Paul, and shape the church in a more non-Jewish way. So I don't want to necessarily call it anti-Semitic. I don't know that it's that, because we're talking about Semites with different views, so to speak, Jews with different views. But there is this tendency on the part of the church as it becomes more and more non-Jewish and moves into the Roman world. And finally, with Constantine the emperor, it's done. The Jewish origins are nice to quickly mention, but to say that for 40 years, up until the destruction of the Jewish temple in 70, so from 30 to 70, the movement continued observing the Torah, going to the temple. And as they weren't doing the church things that later characterized the church. If you ask them, what are you doing? Passover, Pentecost, Shavuot, as it's called in Hebrew, Feast of Tabernacles, Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. We're doing those things. But that's Jewish. Why would you be doing those things? Aren't you a Christian? It's all confusing to people now. But if we had our time machine and went back, let's just say to the year 50, kind of in the middle, and we're visiting Mary, she's living in Jerusalem. She's a Jewish woman getting ready for Shabbat, for the Sabbath. She's got a big household. People are visiting from all over the world because her son is in charge of the movement. And they want to talk to her about Jesus. You raised Jesus. He's the Messiah. They believe he's ascended to heaven. He sits at the right hand of God. He's had this heavenly exaltation. And you get to talk to the mother of this guy, all of that fades and disappears. But we're able to construct a lot, and that's what the book tries to do.
Yeah, that's really terrific. I really loved reading and going through it. In rediscovering Mary, and you used the rehabilitating the real Mary. This has sort of been in a sequence of what you've done in your career over a remarkable several decades in rehabilitating the founders of Christianity. Obviously, Jesus, John the Baptist. You've done Mary Magdalene, James, as you've mentioned, Paul. Just give a quick sentence or two about the rehabilitation of everyone else, so we can see your work in context, not just focused on Mary. Mary is the culmination, I think, of this sequence of founders.
Yeah, now, of course, I didn't write 6 books, one on each figure, and others have written books on each figure. But I finally, towards the later part of my career, not the end, I wanted to start with Mary, and I would name her as number one. She's the oldest because she has the children, and she's related to John the Baptist. According to our only record, she's attending at the birth of John the Baptist. That's in the
Mm.
Gospel of Luke. It doesn't emphasize it, but she stays, I believe it's 6 months, or I'm sorry, to correct. It's either 3 months or 6 months, but either way, I don't remember. It coordinates with when John is born, and I think it's 3 months. So when and Elizabeth, the mother of John, is her relative. We think like what? Not sister, probably, or it would say sister, probably aunt or somebody like that. And so John and Jesus would be cousins. So I would start with Mary. Then I, of course, would go to Jesus. I wrote a book called The Jesus Dynasty. And then I would put in Mary Magdalene, because before you go to James, who takes over from Jesus, as I said, the brother of Jesus, you would have Mary Magdalene. Who is this forgotten woman? Now, everybody thinks of the Da Vinci Code and Dan Brown, and that's actually not a bad start, even though it's a novel and it's a thriller and so forth. We don't have to go that far. But I mean, she is extraordinary. Why does she suddenly appear in the Gospel of Mark? And she's at the cross, head of a band of women. Jesus has a band of sisters following him, as well as brothers. In all the movies, it's the Lone Ranger with 12 guys walking on a hillside. Then they sit down, then they get up, then they walk, then they go somewhere else. Where's the group? This is an entourage of people. It's probably 100, 120 or so people. It's a roving campaign going throughout the land. Women, children, dogs and cats, whatever. They're setting up camp at night. No hotel could hold them, so to speak. And so Mary Magdalene, a woman in charge, along with the mother who started it all off. And then James takes over after Jesus' death. And then I would want to go ahead and add, so we've got the two women. Who did I say after that? I'm trying to remember. You might have to.
Yeah, you said you were John the Baptist and then Paul. Just very quickly.
Okay. And then Paul would be the other figure. I wrote a book called Jesus and Paul. So to rehabilitate them is to try as much as possible to do what I tried to do with Mary. Let's put them back in their own time, their own place, not part of a church development, not part of Christian theology, but they were all Jews living in a very revolutionary time, very difficult time in many ways. And how does that shed light on their lives and what they believed and what they were all about?
I really love how you take each little breadcrumb, put them together, and extrapolate from it, but not wildly speculative, but very logical implications of each breadcrumb. You mentioned earlier in terms of the Book of Mark, where Jesus is mentioned as the son of Mary. That when you know the Hebrew Bible, I mean, it's really astonishing that it's the mother who's the son of, as opposed to that seems simple, but that's to me that's a loaf of bread, not a
Yeah,
crumb.
it really is. And
Um,
then
I,
naming the names of the four brothers. So many of my students, You remember, Robert, I think you wrote me a letter of recommendation to get the job at Notre Dame. So
Oh,
I'm going to the Catholic Bastion in South Bend, Indiana, and I'm teaching Christian origins. And we would get to that verse. You always start with Mark if you're doing Jesus
yeah.
because it's the earliest. And the students, Dr. Tabor, those I didn't know he had brothers. Jesus had brothers and their names. And then some other, oh, those were cousins, don't worry. Or those were half brothers, don't worry. Meaning, what do you mean, don't worry? Well, what you're worried about is what Matthew says. I'm going to quote the Bible, Robert. Matthew 1, verse 18. Jesus is born, and Joseph knew her not until she brought forth her firstborn son. Not being polemical here. This is in our first gospel. Open it up. Chapter 1, verse 18. We all know from reading the Bible, when you say Adam knew his wife Eve and she brought forth a son, we know what that means. It means they live together as man and wife, as we say. They're married. So this perpetual virginity is a much later idea, maybe in the late second century into the third century. And we're going to get into this later, but it has to do with what's going on philosophically in the world. And this
Yeah.
idea that to be really holy is to be asexual and or
Mhm.
just non-sexual, not gender identification. You live a celibate life. But that is not the ideal within Judaism. There's no ideal within Judaism of being celibate and living in companionship with a man or a woman. I mean, that just doesn't even occur anywhere. And Matthew knows that. So he doesn't think that's a big deal. He just wants to point out that the marriage is not consummated until the birth of Jesus because
Yeah.
Joseph's not the father.
Yeah. Yeah. Really
That's
fascinating stuff. You also make a point which I thought was pretty powerful, that Paul, extensively writing in New Testament books, never mentions Mary.
that's
Now, that is another breadcrumb in terms of if Mary was a leader, as you claim, or the matriarch of the church, how come Paul doesn't mention her?
yeah. Now he does have this odd expression. It's not odd in Jewish language, but to us it is. He talks about Jesus, okay, born of a woman,
Uh-huh.
born under the law, under the Torah. Now, born of a woman, it actually is not pejorative. It sounds like it might be. But what it's saying is a real human being. In other words,
Uh,
he didn't drop from heaven, he didn't develop some other magical way. He's flesh and blood. And he also says in the book of Romans, chapter 1, I think it's verse 4, that he is descended according to the flesh from the lineage of David. So he does talk about the Jesus family, but he never names Joseph, he never names Mary. Now, he does say, this is very important, I went up to Jerusalem. This is after his change. Sometimes we try not to call it a conversion because that normally means a new religion. He doesn't take up a new religion. He's still Jewish, but now he believes that Jesus is the Messiah, you see. And as a Jew, he's still observing the Torah as a Jew. He doesn't think Gentiles have to come under the full obligation of Jewish life. But he does say, I met James, the Lord's brother. Jesus, he
hmm,
calls the Lord means master. It doesn't mean the Lord God. Uh,
right.
I met James, the boss's brother, because he's the Lord, the boss. He's in charge of them, although he has now died. So that's in Jerusalem. Now the archaeology comes in. We haven't mentioned that. You mentioned in the introduction. Where are they living in Jerusalem? We're pretty sure that we know that they're living on Mount Zion, not the nothing to do with the temple. When you read in the Bible, we're walking up to Mount Zion. That's the Temple Mount. But actually, it's the highest hill in Jerusalem. It's on the southwest of Jerusalem. And it's elevated even higher than the temple would be here, and this hill would be here. And all the priestly mansions are up there. The rich people live up there, and they kind of look down on the temple from their balconies. Now, I don't know that they had some luxurious place, but a wealthy follower has made available the house. That's where Jesus eats the Last Supper. It's where the group is congregated under the leadership of James. Well, Mary's there, and she's not in a back room somewhere sitting in a rocking chair. I mean, picture a busy household. And I talk in the book about what would it be like in a Jewish household with you got 7 or 8 kids that are growing up. You're going to have marriages. You're going to have births of grandchildren. You're going to have visitors from all over the world coming as Paul goes out and converts others, and people come to Jerusalem for various festivals and so forth. So we've got that is an imaginative reconstruction. But as one of my teachers, we're going to talk about, Jonathan Smith, said, I'm imagining in the direction of the truth. I've never forgot that. He said, we don't just imagine wildly, but in the direction of what it would have been. What was a Jewish woman with influence in a Jewish household? What's a Jewish woman today with influence in a Jewish household? You know, you grew up in such a household. There's tremendous influence of women within Judaism. You know, we think because they don't do some of the public things that men have obligation to do according to some Jewish tradition. That doesn't mean that they're not at the very center of caring for the children. And I don't just mean the babies, but the whole household and the business of the family. Well, what's the business of this family? It's not just to make a living, it's to represent the extraordinary message of this figure, Jesus of Nazareth.
So to me, the final cherry on top of the cake of Mary's background was when you talk about her name. When we hear the word Mary, that is a very Christian name today. But you make the point that the proper translation in English might have been Miriam, which even today is a Jewish name.
Absolutely, it is Miriam. It just comes across in Greek, but she's named for the sister of Aaron and Moses, as many, many Jewish women are down through history. And Maria is probably the most famous female name in the world, especially in the sort of Western world. But Christianity spread everywhere. A lot of people call Mary, certainly in Europe and the United States. But Miriam, very seldom do you see a non-Jewish woman with the name Miriam. So that right away is another crumb in the forest of following Mary, tracing her, or your ice cream and cherry analogy.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like and comment below. You can support Closer to Truth by subscribing. Closer to Truth is now accepting your tax-exempt donations. Please come to closertotruth.com/donate. Thank you very much for supporting us, and thanks for watching.